Hello everyone, my name is Adi, and today we are going to be talking about something a little different. It's been about 2 months since the Pokemon World Championships, and we've all been spending our newfound free time in different ways. I've been spending mine learning a new competitive game, TemTem, a game that is very similar to Pokemon, and specifically competitive double battles within Pokemon. And so, I wanted to make a video explaining the basics of TemTem from the perspective of a pro VGC player to other players who are familiar with at least the basics of competitive Pokemon. So, let's jump into it. TemTem is a game made by Crema that is entirely focused around competitive double battles. There is an in-game story that is all double battles, so if you liked Pokemon Colosseum or Pokemon Gale of Darkness, you might enjoy that, but the focus of this video is going to be on the competitive battles and how they work. The first thing that you should know is that TemTem teams have 8 Tems on them. At the start of a battle, instead of team preview, you have a banning phase that narrows battles into a 5v5. Keep in mind, all these steps are sequential. They do not happen simultaneously like team preview does in Pokemon. First, player 1 gets to ban 1 Tem from the opposing team. Then, with that knowledge, player 2 gets to ban 1 Tem. Player 1 then gets to pick their first lead, and then player 2, again with that knowledge, gets to pick their 2 leads. At this point, player 1 then gets to pick their second lead Tem. As you might imagine, this allows for some counter leading right off the bat. Player 2 then gets a ban, followed by player 1, and then each player gets to sequentially pick their last 3 Tems, as you see on screen, leaving 1 on the bench. This is one of the most important parts of competitive battling, and I think it adds a lot of depth to team building, since you don't want a core strategy to get banned from under you with one simple ban, and you also have to have some redundancy in your game planning for other strategies. If your team falls apart because your opponent bans 1 Tem, it's probably not going to be very successful. It needs to be well-rounded, but simultaneously, the game really incentivizes you to have synergies that we'll talk about later. First, let's talk about the TemTem themselves. Just like in Pokemon, each Tem has 1 or 2 types, 4 move slots, an ability or trait, and an item. Needless to say, the abilities, items, and moves are all very similar to Pokemon, and the types and type chart is as well. There are 12 types, some of which, like Fire, Water, Nature, and Melee, are very similar to Pokemon. Others, like Digital, are extremely different but also remarkably well balanced. I think Digital is a really interesting example because no type resists it. The only Tems that resist it are Arachnite, which has an ability that gives it a resistance to it, and Koish, which has an ability that flips the type chart when being attacked, allowing it to resist this type. You might think that this is overpowered and easily spammable, and while you can build a team around the strategy, digital attacks tend to have a lower base power than other powerful moves from other types, and as a result, you can outbulk this aggro strategy. In other words, each type feels like it has its own characteristics beyond just the type chart's strengths and weaknesses. The attacks are another aspect that is tremendously different from TemTem and Pokemon. First off, moves cannot miss, and there are no probabilistic secondary effects. There's no 10% chance to burn on Fire Punch, for example. On that note, there's also no damage rolls, so a lot of the randomness from Pokemon is now gone. Of course, there is still volatility when you're deciding what attacks your opponent might do on a given turn, but the frustrating, hacksy games of Pokemon that you might play every so often are not going to happen in TemTem. With regards to attacks, each of course has a type, but they also have a stamina cost, hold, priority, and sometimes a synergy, and we're going to talk about each of those. Stamina is the first and foremost. Powerful attacks usually take up more stamina, which your Tem has a limited amount of. For example, my Chimerian on screen has 2 grass moves, Frond Whip, which has a base power of 146 but takes up 33 stamina, while Sharp Leaf, on the other hand, has a 50 base power but only takes up 7 stamina. This gives you an incentive to have some type overlap on your movesets, since overkill damage is now wasteful. This Chimerian only has 48 stamina total, although it carries an item to reduce stamina cost. You can use a move that you don't have enough stamina to cast. However, if you do, you take recoil damage equal to 5 times the amount you went over, and also you cannot move for the next turn, which is called being overexerted. Along with the 6 stats that you know and love from Pokemon, you can also train Tems to have more or less stamina as a 7th stat, and as a result, part of your team building is figuring out exactly how much stamina you need to go through a 3 or 4 move rotation before switching your Tem out. It's also worth noting that each Tem regains 5% of its total stamina per turn, even if it's not in battle, and can choose to rest instead of attacking in a given turn, in which case it will regain an additional 15% of its total stamina. The second element of moves is called hold. If a move has 2 hold, it means you cannot click it until the Tem has been on field for 2 turns. Once you do click it, the counter resets. This is another way of balancing powerful moves and Tems. For example, Tyrannac is absurdly strong, and its abilities are either Unnerve that also hits your partner, or Neutralizing Gas, 2 very good abilities in Pokemon that are also very good in TemTem. However, it's hampered by the fact that its 2 best moves are both 2 hold moves, meaning until turn 3 on the field, it doesn't do too much damage, and its strongest 0 hold move is Ember, which is not all that powerful. On the other hand, Chimerian is largely powerful because it has one of the strongest 0 hold moves in the game, Crystal Plume Gatling, that it can click every turn from the first turn that it's on the field. The next thing to talk about is Priority, which works differently from Pokemon. Priority is essentially a speed modifier in TemTem, meaning a slow Tem using a high priority move might still move after a naturally fast Tem using a neutral or low priority move. Most moves either have a 1, 2, or 3 priority. I'm not sure if there's an official name for these, but we've been calling them 1, 2, and 3. 2 priority is normally considered neutral. A 1 priority move essentially halves your speed stat on that turn, while a 3 priority move gives you a 50% speed boost on that turn. There are also moves that always go first or last, but those are few and far between. Finally, we have Synergy. Synergy means that if your partner is a Tem of a certain type, your move will be powered up in some way. Notably, not every move has a synergy, but the ones that do can be worth building around. For example, this Whiplump has a move called Water Cannon that has a toxic synergy, meaning it poisons opponents if it is next to a toxic type. When it's next to my Chimerian, it's just a normal base 95 power move. But when it's next to my Acronox, a toxic type, it has this added effect. The added effects are usually one of a few things, namely higher priority, lower stamina costs, more damage, a stat boost, or inflicting a status condition, but there are a few exceptions to that. Keep in mind that synergies can easily be disrupted in the ban phase if your opponent sees it coming, and also won't go off if your partner is KO'd before you move. Stat boosts and status conditions are also different from Pokemon. First and foremost, stat boosts are retained even if you switch out. That means that you can take a turn to boost yourself up and then switch out and come back in later to do big damage. On the other hand, that's also the case for stat drops if your opponent is spamming them. However, stat boosts are less important than in Pokemon because their multiplier is reduced. In Pokemon, a +1 boost is a 50% increase in damage, whereas in TemTem it's only a 25% increase. This means that Chimerian, which basically has Intrepid Sword, giving it an attack and special attack boost on the first time it switches in, is a lot more balanced than, let's say, Zacian. The statuses are also different from Pokemon. First off, there are 16 of them, some of which are positive and some of which are negative. If you think that's a lot to remember, keep in mind that Pokemon has stuff like Infatuation as statuses. Notably, each Tem can only have 2 status conditions at a time. If a third one would be added, the oldest one is removed, allowing you to overwrite status conditions strategically. Finally, each status is temporary. A move might burn you for 1 turn or it might burn you for 3 turns, but these turns count down even if you switch your Tem out, meaning you can outlast the damage reduction from burn without leaving your Tem on the field. However, this also means that a burned Tem will take damage even if you switch it out until the burn goes away. There is a full list of statuses on the wiki page, so I won't dive into all of them, but I think the one that VGC players will be the most excited to hear about is what's called Doom, which is functionally just Perish Song. If your Doom counter hits 0, your Tem will faint, and remember, this continues to count down even if you switch out, so you don't have to trap your opponent to use it. That being said, there is counterplay. Most notably, by adding 2 additional statuses to your Tem, you can remove Doom before it hits 0. There are also moves like Purgation that manually remove Doom. To me, Doom is one of the coolest mechanics in the game because at first it seems remarkably broken, but eventually you realize that it's actually really well balanced and can have applications either on a more dedicated team or just generally as a way to spread status and to get rid of defense boosting Tems that might otherwise be hard to deal with because there are also no critical hits. Finally, I want to talk about the equivalent of EVs and IVs in this game, in this case known as TVs and SVs respectively. Each Tem has a value between 0 and 50 for its SV, which is assigned at birth, much like IVs in Pokemon, and you can also increase them with certain items, although those items are quite expensive. You also have 1,000 TVs to allocate across your 7 stats, much like EVs, and similarly, these cap at 500 per stat. After the first point, it takes 5 TVs to increase a stat point by 1, except for hit points, which only require 4 TVs per additional point. Now, notably, there is no hacking in this game because the game is played server-side. However, there is an auction house, so you can just buy flawless Tems with egg moves to skip the breeding process, and they're usually at a pretty reasonable price point. After playing the in-game, I had enough money to buy 2 full 8-Tem teams, and you can also buy the items to EV train them so you don't have to spend too much time doing that either. This is all using in-game currency. In fact, there's a thriving economy largely based around Lumas, which are the game's equivalent of shinies, which are obviously very, very expensive, and also the economy is based around breeding, which I haven't touched because it's way more complicated than breeding in Pokemon. As far as competitive battling goes, there's not only an in-game ladder, but also weekly tournaments in-game. Both of these reward in-game currency, which you can use to buy more Tems or items or whatever you need. There's also a dojo system, which is very similar to gyms in Pokemon Go, except you need to have a clan of 11 people to compete, and I only have 3 friends who play this game, so I haven't actually tried that out yet. They are also going to be adding an in-game TemTem showdown soon, so you won't have to actually obtain your Tems to test your team out. This is expected to come out in December of 2022, so in a couple weeks. There are also a bunch of things that aren't really competitive in this game, but I've really enjoyed and therefore want to cover. First and foremost, your Tems will follow you, including my personal favorite, Grumper, because she is working so hard to keep up with me running around. Next, there is a Battle Frontier area that is honestly pretty fun, and the once weekly gym leader rematches are genuinely competitive. They use the competitive rule set, and they're also the main way to grind in-game currency. Finally, there are 3 different layers in the game, which are essentially a cooperative roguelike, which ends with you fighting a final boss and trying to obtain either a mythical Tem or an egg of your choice with a higher Luma rate. I've had a lot of fun doing these layers, working with my friends, trying to get all the way through, and occasionally getting a really high rarity TemTem or a shiny that is worth a lot and able to single-handedly buy my next team. So, that's my intro. If you are interested in learning more about this game, I'd recommend both the official wiki and tem.team as great resources to get into it. And if you do end up playing competitive, feel free to hit me up on Discord or Twitter because I do want to get a clan together eventually and do some dojo challenges. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I will see you all later.